on, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Studio Series has been both a blessing and a curse when it comes to representing characters from the movie. On one hand, it usually means when a character is given their day in the sun, usually they get the time and energy required to do them right. A lot more fit and finishes afforded to toys like these, compared to what we got back in the day. Sure, many of those earlier toys were arguably better in some ways, and plenty of toys don't meet par, but at the same time they really do go all out whenever they can. For most of these figures, these are the definitive representations of the characters. Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily always work. While Studio Series began as a good way to represent all of the live-action movies, eventually corporate realized they could just bundle in whatever they damn well pleased. More G1? Sure, 86 movie counts now. Have a gap in the system? Games count now. Oh, we don't want to do more movies. Can we do IDW instead? Perhaps most egregious of all, there's using the toy line to promote new movies, instead of doing older ones justice. Nothing wrong with this in a vacuum, mind you, but it can sometimes lead to oddities. Rise of the Beast had a bit of a troubled development, going through many changes in the lead up to its June 2022 release. Oh, sorry, did I say 2022? I meant 2023, gotta put that Unicron in there. Initially, Hasbro intended to have two main toy lines. First, you had the standard Deluxes and Voyagers, meant to release alongside the movie. Then, a year later, the Studio Series figures would trickle out, allowing you to get the properly accurate renditions. Simple, right? Well, with the film delayed, the normal figures, dubbed mainline releases, basically sat in a warehouse, and eventually you'd have the case where both released concurrently. Yes, the terminology is confusing because Studio Series itself is basically called mainline by fans, but people needed a distinction between the two, so we roll with the colloquialisms. Thing is, if both were on the shelves at the same time, why would you ever go for the mainline versions? Wouldn't Studio Series always deliver the better overall experience? Well, that's the thing. Originally, the Rise of the Beast figures were simply meant to release whenever they released, with a looser timeline, but push them into a specific slot, and sometimes the better experience becomes the one you wouldn't expect. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and welcome back to another Versus review. Today's patients, much like many video topics I've been doing lately, have been a long time coming. It's time to pit two titans together and discuss why accuracy isn't always the be-all, end-all. Yes indeed, today's diagnosis pertains to mainline Rise of the Beasts Voyager class Optimus Prime versus Studio Series SS102 Voyager Rise of the Beasts Optimus Prime. Damn, Studio Series really does better with code numbers. I don't know, it just gives a bit more weight to each release. But enough of that, seems like I keep complaining about it in every video. And hey, as we'll see shortly, doesn't necessarily lead to a better toy. To understand the difference between these two toys, we need to take a look at what each line set out to do. Studio Series, of course, is easy. Same old, what's new Salt and Pepper Dino? Whoa! But with quote-unquote mainline, it's a little different. Outside of just being a generalized release to go alongside the film, they're actually based not on the movie itself, but the pre-production concept art. Furthermore, instead of being conceptualized by the standard generation's design team, they actually start their life under the team behind Cyberverse and Earthspark. Of course, this does little to change their actual outcome, as they're still engineered over at Takara. Sadly though, we don't know who's responsible for this specific Optimus Prime. Regardless, as a result, Mainline Prime turns into an amalgamation of his pre-production and final alternate modes. While the general shape is very much in line with the flat nose style, the window shape is much closer to the Age of Extinction off-road hound-esque thingo. Honestly, I would have loved to have seen this in the movie, maybe in the second half via reformatting, wondering if it was cut for time and budget. I mean, they couldn't even depict Stratosphere doing anything in the final battle thanks to too much strain on the rendering. Regardless, this is a really neat take on the old cube with a random back style. Hypothetically, these Voyagers are supposed to be slightly cheaper than their Studio Series counterparts, forcing them to use much lower parts counts. As such, a proper trailer hitch is likely off the table, but honestly, I think they've come up with a pretty good compromise. Without the need to strictly adhere to screen accuracy, they've been able to reinterpret the feet into a bucket mechanism. This really allows them to fill in the robot legs and hide them fully, even flipping out sculpted taillights. They aren't painted, but seeing some of the paint this robot will feature later, I think I can cut it some slack. Overall, this is really clean. It does get a bit messy behind the cab with hollowness, robot joints, and extra panels, but honestly, given it's a stylized back anyway, I don't think it looks that bad. Plus, it's better than, well, we'll get to that later. One thing I really appreciate is how cohesive the thigh section is. They do that thing where they cover it up with gas canisters within the thighs. It's very similar to Earthrise Optimus Prime. In fact, by and large, the transformation borrows a lot from that figure. They've chosen a more cuboid shape though, and I'd argue it makes it work far more effectively. Not to say Earthrise was bad, no, but this just fits the surrounding kibble way more. If this was silver, it'd be practically perfect. But given the apparent budget, it's fine. The sides that sit atop it are also really clean. You can tell it's made up of several panels, but it blends together quite well and uses minimal intrusive hinges. Yes, the windows are a little thin, but this is sort of a running theme with Voyager Optimi, so I'm not going to hold too much against it. I do kinda wish the Autobot symbol was a smidge larger though, and also not misaligned. Still, even though not applied properly, better than some other review subjects. Really though, what makes this shine to a higher level in this mode is the mean as front section. From the windows to the bull bar, this thing is tough as shit. Combining the best elements of both designs, the clear blue pierces through the surrounding red, almost making the techie detail beneath glow with rage.
You can tell this is a pre-production design because he ain't.
Surrounding it, aside from the crisp silver bow tie, is rivets upon rivets upon rivets. Moving down, they actually make really good use of the grey plastic, as if it were its own special details. They use red and light blue to make it seem like it's not just a giant block of the same colour. But even that aside, they've chosen a really good shade. The grey sort of goes for a matte look, not to be confused with Matlock. Thankfully skirting past some of the concerns of Games Workshop grey, and by letting it peek through, it creates some lovely breakup, not just with the bars, but also the grille and even a sort of faux cab stripe. At least that seems to be the intention. They've picked out the edges so that it's separated from the caging. It sadly doesn't go to the sides though, which would really seal the deal for me. That's really only my major gripe with this mode, aside from some hollowness out of the back. Because it's not relying on a specific character design, or rather because it's not afraid to deviate for the purpose of making a better toy, it's able to reinterpret aesthetic oddities as parts of the vehicle mode. While a standard Studio Series toy would have to hide it behind layers and layers of paneling. For example, you have the shoulder greebling on top. Why make it hide away when it can just stay there? Ironically, by trying to make it less realistic, it actually ends up feeling even more so. Everything has its place and purpose, and all of it comes together super compactly. The small size might be off-putting for some, but honestly I think that adds to his charm quite a bit. He's just a mean red truck of boxes, ready to roll into danger, quite easily with its pinned wheels. A lot of pinned wheels on this channel at the moment. In all honesty, this is a hodgepodge of a vehicle, constructed from several types of trucks put together. It's not trying to be anything specific beyond an Optimus Prime alt mode, and that's going to turn off a lot of people. But one thing you cannot deny is that despite that, it does have a clear and concise aesthetic. Sure, it takes a bunch of different ideas and slams them together, but it homogenizes said ideas so that they all gel. Couple that with some really nice and sharp detail, and you've got yourself a killer alt mode. Really, the only thing I'd probably add to this, aside from lengthening the stripes, is fixing the weapon storage. But still, it's certainly better than some other examples we've seen recently. Plus again, as I frequently say, it's far from the most important factor. Mainline Prime's vehicle mode isn't so much a victim of circumstance as it is a triumph of circumstance. In many cases, this shouldn't work, yet it does. I guess necessity sometimes really is the mother of invention, and it genuinely gave us an awesome truck this time. But hey, if you really want to see a victim of circumstance, well, check out who is up against. This alt mode just confuses me. Over and over again, I constantly see people giving it a pass because it's not the primary mode, and it's a marvel of engineering for what it does. But given what's come before, can it really be called that? The biggest excuse I've seen people bring up is that it's good from the front, so just ignore the back half. But honestly, no, I don't think that's a valid excuse. Not because I don't want to ignore the back half. Okay, I don't. But not just because I don't want to ignore the back half. I'm sorry, but legitimately, this cab section is pretty jank as well. Not as jank as the back, but I just can't give it the leeway others can. Really, the only angle it looks passable from is the front, and even then it's got issues. This is probably the crispest part of the alt mode, with awesome clear black windows, striking silver bow ties, awesome silver stripes and lights, and a bumper that, sorry, just puts the main line to shame. This is the one part of the alt mode where they really let the sculptors go to town, and I do appreciate their efforts, but by the same token, it's also slightly elongated. Not Kingdom Core class elongated, but still, once you see it, you can't unsee it. That in itself would be fine, but that's when you realize this is the best part of the alt mode. The further back you go, the worse it gets. The sides are just an absolute mess of hinges and panel lines. 3 folding points? You have all those, and what space is left to put in the actual details? Well, not much as it turns out. The window gets cut off halfway, and you can barely make out the stripe, though maybe that's for the best given how messy it is. There are details here, and it would be really cool to behold if you could actually see them. Then the cab just randomly stops. Much like Devastation Prime, there's no bloody wheel arches on show, leaving no continuity with the gas canister. It makes the whole thing feel like a red box sitting on top of a mess of kibble, instead of integrating with it. And half the time it's even worse because the canister keeps pulling a Marvin and depressing into the body. Yes, this was also an issue on Primes before, such as Earthrise. But all that shows is that they've had 3 years to fix the damn thing, and they already did. On the mainline version. Why didn't they have that fix here too? Not even the top is safe with its scrappy as shit panels stuck all over, barely holding the cohesion together. If there wasn't anything else wrong with this mode, I could let it slide. But this is ridiculous. Though, not as ridiculous as the worst offender here. This is, without a doubt, the worst truck back I have seen on an Optimus Prime. Legitimately, I have messed with Movieverse Legends truck backs with more cohesive trailer hitch sections. For all the complaints I see where people get annoyed where the back is just Prime's leg sticking out, at least it's better than this shit. Honestly, this is worse than just leaving the kibble as is. Least as inaccurate as that is, it's more cohesive. This? Well, the front panels do nothing to blend into the cab, the side lights stick out without giving a shit, the inner panels don't make any attempt to fold in anywhere. Honestly, the feet are the only thing even remotely trying, getting reasonably close to the back of the real truck. But when that's the only thing and it comes at the cost of everything, genuinely, what's the point? Like, seriously, how do you f up a truck this bad? Seriously, what happened here? Well, in this instance, we actually know exactly what happened. Initially, corporate commissioned this figure as a retool of Studio Series 38. As much as I give Hasbro higher-ups shit for a lot of their decisions, this actually makes a lot of sense. The two designs are already purposefully similar. To create a sense of continuity with Bumblebee, continuity immediately thrown out the window because according to Lorenzo, these are both in the same universe as 1 and the rest of the Bay films. Because Sentinel dying twice and Unicron both coming and being Earth also makes perfect sense. And SS38 was a fantastic figure, taking the basic Optimus movements and doing crazy things with them. However, there's a certain thing we've been seeing these days. Moments where the Western design team looks at a retool budget and realizes they can make an entirely new mold out of it. Contrary to popular belief, actual plastic density isn't the most expensive part of a toy. It's actually parts count and sprue count more than anything. By eliminating the latter of these, you massively reduce the budget. And it's how you're able to turn what would initially be an exclusive retool into an entirely new toy. It's how we got masterpieces such as Cosmos, forgotten gems such as Override.
I'm sorry for forgetting her in the Solus Prime review.
And honestly, who knows what else, given Hasbro Corporate is a little more restrictive on what gets out there these days. The behind-the-scenes info on figures like Cosmos was actually taken down, for whatever reason, so thank for archival websites. And this is where SS102 comes from. The Studio Series team realized they could actually go further with this than initially planned. The only parts that remain from the Bumblebee version are the wheels and windows, which honestly is a crazy outcome. The idea itself is admirable, but when you see the execution, you wonder why they bothered in some areas. One of the best parts of SS38 was the accurate truck bed, complete with scaffolding and trailer hitch. Seeing this, I believe they should have instead just copied the bottom half of the toy wholesale. There do exist mods that do this, and although it's not perfect, it's still a massive step up. They'd only have to fix the tolerances in robot mode because the old mold is notorious for falling apart, and you'd have a much more acceptable truck mode. But as it stands, this is easily the 3rd most cursed truck I've ever beheld on this channel. 2nd place being Platinum Edition Ultra Magnus, who still remains a constant. And 1st place, of course...
I think I know how I'm gonna do this. I know how I'm gonna do this. I know exactly how I'm gonna do this. I'm sorry if any of you thought I was gonna have a productive stream, because this is gonna be very weird. That's perfect! That's perfect. There, that's exactly what we need. So now we're gonna place one there and one there. There we go. Then rotate and rotate. Put that back there. Okay, we're making progress here. Yay! And then I think the castle has one as well where we can move it up one. Okay, so this is gonna be so stupid. And now we need to greeble it up with a bunch of black pieces. So I could hypothetically put something there. I don't know if I'd want to. This is so jank. This car kicks ass. It makes me want to... Goddamn. This car kicks ass. And what's my miscarriage without... Oh no. What have I unleashed on this world? It's the loss machine. It's the loss machine. How do they steer the car? With difficulty. So from most angles, it just looks like a really jank car. But with this... I'm at a loss for words. Sheriff Blood on the Lossmobile. This game is very jank. Well, the game just crashed. I think Lost just crashed the game. I can't believe the game just got a miscarriage. The game crashed because Lost was too powerful for it. Or perhaps I flew too close to God. I'm not sure.
As much as people want me to, I cannot just ignore the back half. Again, I'm typically rather lenient on this section, but this isn't just a step too far, it's a long jump world record. And maybe I'd hate this far less if the fronts were damn good, but it's also got a lot of issues. On a better toy, maybe I'd be able to overlook them. But here, I'm afraid I can't. Oh, right, almost forgot the weapon storage. It's, shit. The sword tries to do something cool, but it just gives up halfway. Kinda like the figure itself, and the cannon doesn't even make an attempt. Are they trying to turn this into a stealth force vehicle? Because if so, this isn't working. Ultimately, neither of these are really accurate, but at least one is somewhat accurate to what a concept of a truck is. SS102 is so kibbly that it basically exists in a fantasy line, expecting you to forgive it because from one specific angle it looks borderline okay. I know a lot of people won't give a flying f about this section anyway, because who cares about something that's going to stay in robot mode? But I'm sorry, that just doesn't work with my philosophy. It's a transformer, why shouldn't it transform properly? In the end, although SS102 is the more ambitious piece, this is a classic Icarus story. Sometimes a clear and concise simple idea is a lot better, even if that means it's not specifically aimed at accuracy collectors. It's no contest. Mainline takes the vehicle mode matchup in a landslide victory. Legitimately, the only part it's not as good is the coloring. A Studio Series is more vibrant. But what's the point when the other one doesn't even get close to being cohesive? Why would you engage in something that's actively worse just because it looks passable from one angle, and because it's closer to the screen model? Stop giving toys a pass because they're accurate. There's more to life than following exactly what was seen on screen. The transformations are also very emblematic from where the figures initially came from in terms of design. Like, think of the conversions as a microcosm for how these two basically operate. And I mean operate as entire figures, not just in the transformation. Mainline Optimus Prime treads a lot of ground that was previously trodden by other figures. The top half is very reminiscent of Earthrise, while the back half takes a few ideas from the Evasion version. And you might think, oh, that sounds kind of boring, but I honestly think it reinterprets those ideas in ways that are honestly better. At least when it comes to the conversion experience anyway. Just get rid of the weapon first, of course. And I guess we'll start off by getting rid of the trailer hitch as well, because that just rotates to the side there. At the front, you basically untab these and push them into the sides here. Like so, sort of the inverse of what Earthrise does. You unhook the wheel sections from the sides here, you take this double hinge, and you rotate it up there and fold in the wheels there. That will then give you enough clearance to bring the entire waist section down in one fell swoop. You then rotate the feet into place like so, using their swivels, and you separate the legs, as well as rotate these in if they haven't done that already, and they click in nice and solidly. These unslot from their hinges like so, and then you rotate the arms out so they basically just do an Optimus. To get some more motion, you rotate these back on the double hinges, they unpeg there, and they repeg there, and then with the arms you can do the rest of the Optimus like so, with the fists coming out. The torso section rotates around like so, and then I love this bit. It's a nice bit of automorph. You push this section back, and then push this section back, and the further back you bring it, eventually it'll click out the chest. It's very subtle and not very complicated, but I kind of miss stuff like that. I get why transformations don't do it anymore. I mean, transforming itself is enough of a gimmick. But for once, I am glad to see just a little bit of automorph. It is nice. Anywho, last but not least, you rotate the octagonal hinge backwards, and you're done. Fundamentally, this should not work. It's just a bunch of existing transformation steps just copy-pasted. But I think in this new context, where those transformation steps have far more satisfying starting and stopping points, I'm gonna say, transforming this guy is just better than Earthrise and Evasion Optimus. Not to say I dislike those figures, I really do like those figures. But like, it's just better. As for SS102, well, he tries some new stuff and goes off in his own direction, but it doesn't really work. It is so close to being there, but it's just not very satisfying. Of course, we just need to get rid of the weapons. You untab the leg sections from here. That will allow you to separate the legs. You rotate and rotate the feet down like so. You pull this hinge out and it sits on the back like so. And then then you bring the rest of the leg panels into place. I guess it's sort of satisfying, but it just feels unfinished, especially when you see the result that the truck mode ends up with. Anyway, you take these panels and rotate them upwards like so. Yoink the entire bumper section off like that. Bring out these hinges on the sides here, like so. I don't know why that one was so hard. And then the arms almost do an Optimus, but not quite. You'll notice there's a swivel here as well as the standard hinge for the shoulder. You want to bring the swivel forward and lock the shoulder into place there, so it just moves ever so slightly on the axis. After that's done, you can bring these panels there and rotate these panels on the sides like so. You open up the torso, which will allow you to rotate this around 180 degrees. Make sure this is out of the way so that we can get the wheels in like so. Kind of interesting that the Studio Series version only has one set of pinned wheels and the rest are all clipped, whereas the mainline one actually has pinned wheels. It seems like it was reversed. Anyway, the backpack goes back into place and this whole section clips into the back. Arm cavities open up, allowing you to bring out the fists and close that. You then fold in and in on the panel and then bring it into place. I appreciate them trying new ideas, but I just don't think this really works that well, for reasons that I'll get into later. Last but not least, you bring up the head and click it into place, bring down this extra panel, and then the windows will sit on that panel. So yeah, I don't really know. It is commendable that they tried new things, they tried to do different stuff to SS38, but the stuff they do different leads to articulation issues later on, and the semi-satisfying bits just feel like they could have gone a lot further. So ultimately, neither of these are bad, they're both decent transformations. But even though this one is technically the more ambitious conversion, and the mainline version just kind of copies ideas seen before, his just more satisfying. I just gotta give the conversion to him in the end. I don't necessarily want to dump everything on this figure because it owes a lot of its identity to what came before, but that identity is just more solid and well-rounded, both in the vehicle mode we just saw and the transformation. So yeah, another point to the evasion, the Earthrise, mainline version. Mainline version, yes. This is not a bad transformation, but even though this copies a lot, it's just so much better. Unlike the difference between vehicle modes, the robots are a little more deceptive. On first glance, it might seem like one is the clear winner. It's only when you dig below the surface that you start to see where one figure triumphs and another fails. I suppose once again, it's best to compare these in order, so starting with mainline, here's actually quite neat. Again, here's a bit of a mashup between the final design from the movie and random bits of the vehicle mode. While the legs and waist section are basically movie accurate, the feet and windows are taken straight from the vehicle mode. And while the arms are pretty much one-to-one in terms of detail, the proportions are completely different. Overall, he's a much swoller affair, closer to the concept art of a would-be chonkster, and as far as that goes, he pulls it off really well. The window pecs are absolutely gorgeous, pushing the transparent blue front and center, and christening it with the silver bow ties and mirrors. There's no matrix cavity, but that's fine by me, considering how tiresome they were all getting even by this point. And it more than makes up for it with the automorph to get here. Although it's not pinned in, they remain in place quite well. The only reason people assume they don't is because Hasbro's stupid insistence of open packaging, leading to windows getting stolen from the shelves all too often. What, you didn't want to eat into billion-dollar profits? How's that shrinkage going for you? How are the Torch Skullgrins doing? Yeah, that's what I thought. The arms are okay, if a little spindly. It makes sense given how this transforms, and thinner arms are probably better for this aesthetic than shorter ones a la Earthrise, from which this, again, draws a lot of its engineering DNA from. Interestingly, though, it highlights something rather curious with this mode, the use of paint over base plastic. Presumably to keep costs down, this figure is cast mostly in light grey, with paint usage for color breakup instead of sprue usage. Much like with the Studio Series version, using sprues is far cheaper, which is probably how they kept the, in theory, costs down. So while you do see plastic difference around the back of the figure, the front is mostly done in paint, especially with the arms. Yes, aside from the kibble, everything here is paint. This is really risky, as it can cause two potential issues. Firstly, the paint itself can look significantly cheaper than raw plastic. Thankfully, that's not an issue here. Both the red and blue are extremely premium, with a nice semi-gloss finish and enough coats to give them the visual density they deserve. Like, just think for a second, there isn't actually any blue plastic on this thing. It's all blue paint between the legs and head. It's essentially the inverse of Legends of Cybertron Optimus Prime and on a Voyager. That's insane! Also really durable too, which is very nice. Though durability isn't the second main issue, because plenty of figures have done okay with that. No, it's actually color balance. When you resort to using paint instead of plastic, you have to be careful that it doesn't take the paint budget away from everything else. Unfortunately, this is where one of my biggest gripes gripes with this figure comes from. It's not that big, but it is there and often I can't ignore it. Especially around the torso section, this guy is missing a lot of paint. I get that it's technically supposed to be a budget Voyager, even if that never really happened in Australia, but especially with the thigh to midriff portion, he's pretty plain. I guess I should be glad it's not Games Workshop grey, but honestly, some yellow and black on the hips and silver on the midriff would have really made this paint scheme perfect. I get why it is the way it is, but given how awesome the rest of the figure is, I just wish the paint worked well. And don't get me wrong, everything else is basically on the money. From head to toe, he's covered in immaculate detail, especially in those legs. The way it all comes together, visually that is, makes a bold statement. And you never really realize that just the front of the legs are painted. It's done that well. Even from the back, he's virtually free of waffles and kibble. Sure, there are some cutouts in the legs for transformation, but they're really minor and do nothing to break up the sculpt. They've even improved on the inspiration by having the front wheels fold up further, so that they're not stapled to the buttocks. Not something they had to improve, Earthrise was fine in that regard, but they went the extra mile. That's dedication. But perhaps my favorite thing with this figure, aside from maybe the chest windows, is the posing. It's got a few limitations here and there, particularly in the head and waist section, but I'd be lying by omission if I didn't say I'm smitten with the articulation. It's not just the inclusion of the joints, it's how they feel. It doesn't need to feel premium. This is a toy aimed at younger audiences, and yet it does. It looks even cooler when you bring in the weapon. Yes, this weapon isn't accurate in the slightest, taking more inspiration from the Bumblebee outing, but it's still a pretty nice gun, albeit a bit compact. Does clash aesthetically with the rest of the design though, definitely could use some more coherence. But thankfully it really accentuates the articulation, which as I said is quite good. While the limited waist can be annoying in some instances, the torso swivel from Transformation acts as a good substitute. Combined with the big beefy legs that give him a nice center of balance and the deep ankles, you can really get this guy past the dynamicism threshold easily. Part of me wishes he also came with a melee weapon to make use of those inward wrist ball joints, but I doubt such was possible given the amount of budget allocated to the paintwork. At least he has those ball joints to facilitate such. Like I've said in previous reviews, this is something I think all Transformers should do with fold-out wrists going forward, long as there's actually space to cram it in there. Now, of course, he's not without flaws of his own. I've already gone over the midriff section, but honestly, I can easily get over that. Something I take much more issue with is the head sculpt. For starters, this thing is way too small. I'll always take an undersized head over an oversized one, as it makes it look infinitely better. But still, this is incredibly dinky compared to the rest of the body. Makes some of the less desirable proportions look even worse than they really should. But even that aside, it's just kinda icky. Because they don't have any blue plastic on this thing, the whole thing is covered in paint, and it is way too thickly applied. The mask is okay, I guess, but the helmet seriously looks like plasticine from some angles. I can forgive the lack of motion, it's just on a swivel, which isn't ideal, but I can live with it. But it absolutely needed to be bigger, and the paintwork needed to be better. Much as I love light piping, I would have gladly sacrificed it if it meant improving this head sculpt somewhat. Though I do love the light piping and wish more Transformers would do it. A bad head sculpt can, in some cases, ruin a figure, even beyond making a mediocre outing seem even worse. Sometimes it can be so woefully bad that there's just no saving it. I don't think this is a case of that, but I can see why this head sculpt would turn many people off this outing. If I'm being honest though, it doesn't for me. Yes, this figure has its issues. And yes, it's inaccurate to the point of ridiculousness. But at the same time, as a toy, it's bloody fantastic. Are you telling me I should ignore all the qualities this figure has just because of a little bit of jank and a decision not to fit into a box fans want to put it into? Ultimately, this isn't specifically Rise of the Beasts Optimus Prime. It's more so an Optimus Prime. And honestly, I think it does a pretty good job. At least just being an Optimus Prime with a full stop at the end is an easy bar to reach. With Studio Series Prime, it's close, but everything is just tainted ever so slightly. When looking at it in photos and in the box even, sure, it looks real good. But get closer, up and personal, and the illusion slowly starts to fall apart piece by piece. Like, the one part I can point to and say actually works without repercussions is the head sculpt. Unlike Mainline, this actually works really well. It's of a reasonable size and it's sculpted and painted pretty well. Not amazingly, but still pretty well. I do think the blue is a little dull, but it's not a deal breaker here, at least not as much as the legs. The torso that sits atop it starts off pretty good with a lovely segmented chest piece. Although they're new pieces compared to SS38, they bring back the best elements of it and develop some really nice contouring. That just comes to a halt when you move in any direction. The midriff feels like it should work with some lovely detail on the sides coated in gorgeous gunmetal, but it's just ruined with this massive grey block in the middle, looking super out of place and breaking the consistency right down the middle. For the longest time, I couldn't really explain why I hated this part so much. I mean, it's poorly placed, sure, but that in itself doesn't ruin a torso. Then Perspective End pointed out it looks like puckering lips, and made the whole torso look like a Botox-obsessed fashionista. And instead instead of not being able to unsee it, I realized I was seeing this all along subconsciously. Suffice to say, I get why this works the way it does with all the hinges, but me, it just ruins the sculpts. Same with the shoulders. For the most part, they look pretty cool. I like how the bits all fold up around the sides, especially the lights at the top, and they reshape the truck mass pretty well. But then you start to use the shoulder, and it looks incredibly out of place. This is a classic case of trigger-happy shoulders, and it's weird. Usually I'm okay with this kind of joint. It's only really 2 examples that I've started to become annoyed with it, and it's not a specifically Optimus Prime thing because I've had Primes that do this well. I think it just depends on the design itself overall. Does the design work with trigger-happy shoulders? Devastation Optimus doesn't, and neither does this, I'm afraid. It's not the kind of Optimus. This just looks off. Not as off as the forearms, though. These are just so weird. The combination of minuscule elbow assemblies and massive forearm panels really pushed the jank factor. Honestly, I think this would have worked a lot better with kibble being used, because at least then you would be able to differentiate what's supposed to be arm and what isn't. I appreciate them trying something new and interesting with this, but it just doesn't work. Also, no 5mm ports? Yeah, these are actually a completely different diameter for whatever reason, so the only weapons he can use are the ones he comes with. Seems odd if you ask me, especially since he comes with 5mm ports on the backpack, along with the normal ones. Also, not sure how I feel about them wasting a lot of the paint budget on this piece. Like, why? You could have literally used this anywhere else. Seems patently ridiculous to put all this paint on a piece nobody is going to pay attention to. Oh yeah, sure, let me just rearrange my collection to display everything backwards. The legs are alright, I guess. The midriff is painted reasonably well with continuation of the gunmetal. The yellow is a little sloppy in terms of filling in the lines, but the actual pigment itself is crisp and well defined. But you go further down and it just becomes really boring. With the exception of the shin vents, the mechanical detail starts to become really washed out. Combined with the return of dull blue plastic, you get legs that are functional, but not good enough to warrant the shit show that is the truck mode. And perhaps most frustrating of all, the thighs don't naturally rotate out to the sides. The back panels consistently get stuck, so you have to angle everything in a hyper-specific way. Actually, I take way more issue with this than the trigger-happy shoulders, because at least these mostly move where you want them to, albeit weirdly. There's not even a reason for it, given they're primarily visible from the underside of the alt mode and nowhere else. So ultimately, you're just left with a figure that on paper should pose really well, but in practice fails at nearly every turn. Great that he has double-jointed elbows, but when he has forearms built like shoeboxes, it just looks incredibly jank. Hooray, he has an ab crunch from transformation, but it breaks the sculpt, so it's completely useless. Not to insist he should have a working ab crunch, but like, it's annoying that it gives you that illusion, then takes it away. Not even the accessories can save him. They almost do, with the sword looking really cool. It's painted immaculately and sculpted really well, and even gets 2 separate mounting points. The cannon can get f***ed though. It's accurate to a point, but it's incredibly undersized. Like, trying to recreate the original scene is just meh. It's just not that great. And that's the feeling I get overall. It's far from the worst Optimus Prime I've covered on this channel, even recently, but it's just so lackluster in so many areas. Yes, it's more accurate, but why should that be the only metric of quality? It's just one of those cases where people seem to defend it because it's closer to the source material than the alternative, ignoring every other issue it has. Not to mention, on paper, it's significantly more expensive than the mainline version. What's supposed to happen is the kiddie version is meant to be at least $10 below when currency converted, but nope! Instead, these two cost exactly the same in Australia for whatever reason. But taking into consideration the original intent, it is wild to me that the hypothetically cheaper alternative came out better. It genuinely had everything working against it, and yet it still succeeded. Yet for whatever reason, people go, no, it's too stylized and not close enough to the movie, so it doesn't count. Look, I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum. That accuracy first standpoint is just as valid as my own. But I'd be lying by omission once again if I didn't say it was annoying hearing the constant praise for this thing, ignoring all the faults, and all the shitting on minor problems with the overall better version. Or at least it was. Yeah, funny thing, time tends to balance things out. In the months since, a lot of the hype for this thing has died down, and with it finally getting a wider release, far fewer people seem to care. SS102, released in the new packaging, seems to be sitting around way longer than his wavemates. Legitimately, the SS38 reissue that came out a few months prior sold way better. Matter of fact, it sold out practically instantly, and yet, he just doesn't. A lot of it might boil down to different circumstances. The first round was a Target exclusive in the States, and even though he was more widely available down under, there was a perceived sense of urgency to pre-order. But at this point, that magic has faded. Probably doubly so after the failure of the movie he derives from. Not sure what the whole fandom is like, but I'm just not hearing the same level of excitement as there is for, say, Cosmos or Galaxy Shuttle or even Dirge and Ramjet being reissued. The magic may truly be gone, and with it, the truth of the matter has come to light. From a logical standpoint, the way in which these two figures function should be switched. The mainline version, by design, is a more derivative piece, ripping its conversion system wholesale from Evasion and Earthrise primes before him. He's not accurate, is missing plastic pigments, and has proportional issues all over. Conversely, SS102 is a case where they were given a task of making a retool, and instead went above and beyond to make a new mold. There's a better fit and finish on things, and in general, it's a far more ambitious toy. I mean, they even got one of the most ambitious toy designers to develop it, known for making some crazy wacky transformations. That should be a recipe for success right there. However, things don't always work out the way you would think. In actuality, the derivative piece soars while the experimental work flounders. Although the piece that's meant to be cheaper treads ground previously trodden, it does damn well. In some ways, better than previous attempts. Meanwhile, while SS102 had its victory served to it on a silver platter, it sidestepped and sort of face-planted into the ground. I'm not saying that decision is in itself a bad one. We've gotten plenty of fantastic figures under that same ideology. This is just the flip side. If you're going to have the balls to forge your own path, maybe map out where you want to go first. And also don't be afraid to rely on ideas that came before. But more than anything, as much as I don't want to tell people how to collect, don't take accuracy as the be-all and end-all. Expand your horizons, engage in aesthetics you might not vibe with otherwise. Play with your toys. Toys are fun. Engage with them as such, for at least in my eyes, leaving them on a shelf kinda defeats the purpose. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your collecting styles below. Do you mess with your figures, or are you an accuracy-first, display-oriented type? Which prime gave you what you wanted? Did you instead sidestep this issue by getting an improved knockoff, or perhaps the DNA design kits? I was tempted, but it felt too much like breaking my rule on upgrading figures I don't like, and I don't want to push that again so soon. And as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time!